October 2007. Nintendo Power released the issue 220 of their magazine. This edition includes an entire section featuring an interview with Mega Man's designer Keiji Inafune, where the interviewer asked, "I have heard you consider Mega Man 3 one of your least favorite Mega Man games. Why is that?" Inafune responded with, "The reason I said it was my least favorite wasn't because of the gameplay or that I didn't like the game, but it was mainly because of just what went into the game and what was behind the release of the game. Numbers 1 and 2, I really wanted to make the games. I was so excited about them. Number 3, it just turned very different." If Mega Man 1 laid the foundation for the series and then Mega Man 2 improved upon it, you might think that the following games would just keep getting better and better, but Mega Man 3 is a game that took one step forward and 3 steps back. In my previous Mega Man videos, I have first started by going over the history behind the development of the game, then I do an overview of the game features, and then I provide an in-depth analysis of my experience with the game. However, this time around I would like to do things differently. I would like to start by going over the game itself and then explain why the game ended the way it did. Mega Man 3 follows the trend of its predecessor in how it handles a continuation for the series. Instead of changing the formula or the way the game is played, Mega Man 3 focuses more on building upon the foundation laid by the previous game. There are still 8 Rebel Masters to choose at the beginning of the game. You beat each level by killing enemies, beating platforming challenges, and facing a boss at the end, but you get a special weapon that gives Mega Man special properties. And Mega Man controls the same as the previous 2 games, for the most part. The brand new addition of Mega Man 3 is the slide, a new movement tool that is activated by pressing down, either left or right on the D-pad, and then the A button. This will allow Mega Man to slide for a short period of time, in which Mega Man will be able to go through small gaps or avoid flying enemies. This new mechanic is the bread and butter of Mega Man 3, and I'll go in details about this mechanic later on, but it seems like this mechanic was originally planned for the first game. During the development of Mega Man 1, the team planned a crouch move for the character. The idea being that players had to strategically decide whether it was best to jump or crouch to avoid enemies' attack. However, Akira Kitamura believed that approach was not suited for Mega Man, as the timing to see the high differences of projectiles was really short, making it harder to differentiate which type of attacks could be jump and which one could be crouch. As such, the team scrapped the crouch mechanic and instead focused on an only jump system. But the crouch system was reworked for Mega Man 3 into what we know as the slide mechanic, which was a more flexible movement option as it will serve both as a defensive and offensive tool. By sliding under an enemy, Mega Man can shoot that enemy from behind, granting a positional advantage to the player and making the combat more involved and strategic. In concept, it is a really cool mechanic, but it compromises the simplicity of the game. And it's here where we start to see what Mega Man 3 is trying to accomplish. Compared to the previous 2 games, this one wants to elevate the Mega Man series to greater heights. But can the game hold up to that ambition? Well, when we boot up Mega Man 3, we are presented with just the title screen, a really bare bone one at that. It's just the logo of the game in a black background. This is a step backward from its predecessor where we had an intro cutscene. Now, intro cutscenes were not the norm in the NES era, so I would not hold that back against Mega Man 3. However, once the game starts and it shows the Royal Master Selection screen, I cannot avoid but look at the glitch line on top of Shadow's Man portrait. Now, this is only a visual glitch, it's nothing game breaking. However, we haven't even started playing the game and Mega Man 3 is already giving us a bad first impression. But you know what they say, never judge a book by its cover. Where there was a downgrade on the presentation, this might be compensated by fun gameplay and engaging level design. And regarding gameplay, Mega Man 3 retains a lot of what makes the previous two games fun, while also tweaking existing mechanics. The movement items from Mega Man 2 make a comeback with a new coat of paint, as Mega Man 3 introduces a brand new character, Rush. The purpose of this character is to replace the generic items from the previous game for a robot pet companion. In the game itself, Rush works similar to the other special weapons. The player can select one of its three forms, and when the special button is pressed, Rush will spawn next to Mega Man, and when Mega Man jumps on top of Rush, a special action will be performed depending on the form. The first form is Rush Coil, which is unlocked from the start of the game. This form sends Mega Man upwards, allowing him to reach higher platforms. The second form is Rush Marine, which is unlocked after beating Shadow Man. This form allows Mega Man to move in 8 directions while the character is underwater. And the third form is Rush Jet, which is unlocked after beating Needle Man. This form also lets Mega Man move in 8 directions, but only while the character is in the air. These three forms allow levels to feature more complex terrains compared to the previous games, as now Mega Man has more tools to approach different terrain layouts. However, similar to the movement items from Mega Man 2, the Rush forms also consumes weapon energy, making it so that players can solely rely on these forms to beat levels. In theory, Rush is a great addition to the game because it complements the platforming challenges without trivializing them, but in practice, the levels don't fully take advantage of this mechanic. One of the biggest issues with the Rush transformations is the way they can go from game-breaking to almost useless. The Rush Marine only works underwater, and throughout all levels in Mega Man 3, only 3 levels feature underwater sections. So, for the majority of the game, Rush Marine does absolutely nothing. Now, this wouldn't be that much of an issue considering that Rush is not supposed to be this tool that easily beats every platforming challenge that the game throws at you. Instead, the idea of Rush is to give players alternative paths or solutions to platforming challenges. But in that sense, underwater sections are just in the game to give a purpose to the Rush Marine instead of being an interesting platforming challenge. For comparison, Bubble Man stage on Mega Man 2 was way more interesting because the level took advantage of a change in physics to force the players to take a different approach, as if they jump carelessly, they will fall for an insta-kill spike. However, underwater sections in Mega Man 3 just require the player to activate the Rush Marine to easily go through these sections without a lot of engaging elements. The most interesting things that these sections do is fill the screen mindlessly with enemies. Rush Coil feels more useful and intuitive, because this tool is very straightforward, it's just a higher jump. What I like about this form is that it is unlocked from the very beginning, so the starting set of levels make good usage of Rush Coil by including items in optional areas that can only be reached with Rush Coil. That makes it so that a Rush Coil serves more as a utility tool. On the other hand, the Rush Jet is probably the best movement tool that we have seen so far in the series. Rush Jet in Mega Man 3 completely breaks apart the idea of Rush transformations because you can trivialize almost any platforming challenge with it. Now, I would say that it is fun to experiment around with Rush Jet. The versatility and freedom that this form provides makes for an interesting experience. Personally, I think the Rush transformation shines the brightest in the late game sections that are designed around the usage of these forms. By this point, the game expects the player to be familiarized with how these forms work, allowing for more challenging level design. But sometimes, these sections can go a little overboard. An interesting change in Mega Man 3 is how special weapons were handled. The roster of special weapons in the previous entry was great, as all weapons have, at the very least, a niche usage. However, the Metal Blade was just so overpowered that it outclassed every other weapon for most situations. Mega Man 3 heavily tones down the power of special weapons, to the point where I will say that special weapons are the weakest they have ever been. Although special weapons are at their weakest in this game, they are not useless. The fact that weapons are way more balanced actually incentivized me to experiment around with different options and constantly switch out special weapons more often. When you take a closer look at how the weapons were designed in Mega Man 3, you realize that most of them have really powerful traits while also feeling balanced. One example of this is a Magnum Missile. It is a projectile that locks onto enemies and flies towards them. It is an extremely useful weapon to hit enemies that are not within the reach of the default weapon, and the fact that the projectile locks onto the enemies makes it so you don't really have to aim properly to make good usage of the weapon. However, the Magnum Missile is balanced by the fact that it consumes a lot of weapon energy, so you can't just spam it mindlessly. I really like this design philosophy for special weapons because it prevents the player from just using one or two weapons throughout the whole game, and instead it incentivizes to try out all weapons to see how useful they can be in different scenarios. And on paper, all of this sounds fun, but there is one issue, and that is that not all special weapons work properly. The most infamous example of this is the top spin, which drains an absurd amount of weapon energy if used against Shadow Man or an enemy that is immune to the top spin. This is not intentional, as this is an issue that is not present in the Mega Man 3 version in the Wily Wars, and this glitch makes the top spin kinda useless because its inconsistent energy consumption makes it really hard to use. But if you play the Wily Wars version, you notice how good top spin actually is. It's a melee weapon that you can only activate while Mega Man is in the air, and it's great for platforming sections with tons of flying enemies. With good timing, you can deal with them easily without stopping your momentum. And the weapon in this version of the game drains so little weapon energy that it's kinda spammable, which might seem like it makes it a little too powerful, but its short range compensates for that fact. And it is actually a good thing that the weapon consumes so little energy, as it makes it more forgiving to use. It is just a shame that the weapon does not work properly in the original Mega Man 3, as the idea is a lot of fun and it complements platforming really well. Now, in another set of ideas, I would like to go over the level design in this game. If you recall from my previous videos, the level design in Mega Man 1 felt hit or miss. Mega Man 2 took what worked from that game and made it even better. Both Mega Man 1 and 2 excel at level design. For the most part, these games follow a set of principles to create fun level layouts, challenging but smart enemy placement, and creative gimmicks. So with how the games have become better at level design with each entry and how a foundation has already been established by this point, you might think that Mega Man 3 will reach a new high for the series in terms of level design. But Mega Man 3 feels undercooked in that aspect. First, let's go over the positives. The presentation of each level is great. I know that the lack of an intro and the glitchy select screen were a letdown when it comes to the initial presentation of the game, but the game compensates with levels that both look great and have really cool visuals. The biggest highlight is a Snake Man stage, which for the most part is made of tile blocks that resemble snake skin, and it further plays with this idea by including shooting enemies that are snakes that blend into the level layout, as if the enemy itself is a part of the stage. My favorite enemy in this level is the mini-boss, because the floor also moves alongside the boss. It helps make the level feel alive. And while this stage takes the snake motif in the most literal way possible, it is still really cool, because it's not only about good visuals, but there are also elements that affect gameplay. The biggest improvement in Mega Man 3 over its prequel is how each Robot Master uses the theme of the level to make creative and fun level mechanics. Magnum Man stage is a perfect example, as the level plays with an already existing idea, which is invisible blocks. But the level adds a layer of complexity to this idea by introducing magnets which pull Mega Man towards them, creating a platforming challenge that forces the player to tackle invisible blocks in a different way than they have been handling these sections in previous entries, while also working around the theme that the level is designed around. In that sense, Mega Man 3 gives each Robot Master its own identity with both visual elements and gameplay. If you recall from earlier, the new addition of Mega Man's moveset in this game is the slide. And this is another mechanic which heavily influenced the way levels were designed, as now enemies and obstacles have more complex behavior to account for this new tool. This is seen with enemies like Hammer Joe, which tests the player's knowledge on using the slide attack as both an offensive and defensive tool. However, while the enemy's behaviors give functionality to the mechanic, the placement of the enemy is not as well thought out. Let's just take a look at how the enemy is used in a Snake Man stage. We first see Hammer Joe in a room where we enter through a ladder at the bottom, with the enemy standing on top of a platform. The layout of the room and the position of the enemy helps the player understand what the enemy attack pattern is without putting them in immediate danger, allowing the player to come up with a strategy to better approach this challenge. This is a perfect way to tutorialize the player on this type of enemy and how to use the slide mechanic on them, because the player is given enough space to perform this action in combat. But then we go to the next room, where there is another Hammer Joe, but this time in a smaller space and with two ladders on the top corners. Intuitively, the player might think that there are two options here. If the right ladder is chosen, the player avoids facing Hammer Joe, saving time and resources. On the other hand, if the left ladder is chosen, the player must deal with Hammer Joe to go to the next room safely. However, the issue is that the right ladder leads to a dead end. And yes, there are some items in that room, but it does not feel like a proper reward, because the items you get are random, which means that you could get something that you don't need. And when you go back down, you will still need to face the Hammer Joe. The layout and enemy placement is confusing because it gives an illusion of choice to the player. An encounter with the Hammer Joe in this room does not feel like it adds anything, because the enemy is in such a small platform that your best bet is to either camp it from below or just use Rush Coil to skip the encounter altogether. In contrast to the previous games, the level design in Mega Man 3 feels purposeless for the most part. Before, if there were multiple waves of the same type of enemies, the difficulty of each wave will scale naturally, making it so that each encounter was more difficult than the one that came before it. Now it feels like enemies are just treated like something that is added to make rooms feel less empty. Now, some levels in Mega Man 3 are really good. Needleman stage is one that takes the most advantage of the new mechanics added in this game, with the needle obstacle serving as an interesting and fun challenge that tests the player's timing when using the slide. Hardman stage is also another example of a stage that takes full advantage of this type of challenges. But while these levels are fun, it is important to ask if the slide and rush transformations were good enough additions to justify these levels. Don't get me wrong, these are good mechanics, and the way the levels are designed around them is entertaining enough to make the mechanics stand out and fun to use. But it won't take long to notice that a lot of enemies test the player on the same sets of mechanics. Let's take the slide for example. Before, I mentioned that the Hammer Joe is an enemy designed around the slide mechanic, but there are other enemies that fulfill the same purpose, like the Viking, the Returning Monkey, and even some bosses. And yes, all these enemies have distinct attack patterns and animations, but facing all of these enemies feel the same. It's always the same strategy, wait until they jump and then just slide under them. Mega Man 3 still possesses a wide variety of enemy types and obstacles, but there's still a lot about this game that feels stale, as a lot of enemies, obstacles, and layouts are reused a lot throughout the game. And a perfect example of this is found within the Dog Robot stages, which are unlocked once all 8 Robot Masters are defeated. These are remixed versions of Sparkman, Needleman, Gemini Man, and Shadow Man stages, reusing the same background, obstacles, and enemies found within those levels, but with a new layout and different enemy placement. Now, there is nothing wrong with reusing elements from already existing levels to create new levels, especially if it's done smartly and creatively. But the Dog Robot stages are the most creatively bankrupt levels in the game, as they're just harder versions of their respective levels. And usually what that means is either spamming tons of enemies on the screen or putting multiple challenging sections one after another. An example of this is the underwater section in Gemini Man stage, which returns in the Dog Robot stage version, but now there are way more enemies on the screen. Or the falling block sections in Sparkman stage, which are made more challenging in the Dog Robot stage by having multiple falling blocks in succession while also requiring the player to jump over pits. Now, the difficulty of the Dog Robot stages is not that hard. It is definitely a spike in difficulty compared to the previous 8 stages, especially with the design accounting for the player having access to all special weapons and rush transformations, which make it so that their sections are designed around using these tools. But at their core, the Dog Robot stages are still the same as the Robot Master stages. They use the same enemies, the same obstacles, the same gimmicks. There is nothing new here. Even the bosses were reused, as all the bosses in these stages use the same attack patterns as the Robot Masters from the previous game. And once you are done with the Dog Robot stages, you get access to the Wily Castle stages, which feel extremely undercooked. These are the easiest levels in the game, with really simple and bare-bone platforming sections. Like, the Dog Robot stages are not the hardest thing ever, but they put way more of a challenge than the Wily Castle stages. Even the final boss of the game is really easy, you can beat him in less than 30 seconds without using any glitch. By the end, the game leaves such a bittersweet taste. There are definitely some good ideas in here, and it is a fun game, but there is a lot that feels unfinished. It makes you wonder, what happened? After making 2 really solid games, you might think that the development team should be well aware of what makes a good Mega Man game, especially considering how the director, Akira Kitamura, made sure to establish the foundations for the series. However, there is one thing that I had kept from you throughout this video. Akira Kitamura, the creator of Mega Man and the main planner of both Mega Man 1 and 2, did not work in the development of Mega Man 3. As a matter of fact, he left Capcom during the development of Mega Man 3. The reason for leaving the company has never been made public. Some sources have claimed that Kitamura sought more creative freedom. However, there does not seem to be enough evidence to back up that claim. Something that is for sure is that after leaving Capcom, Kitamura joined another Japanese game development company called Takeru, where Kitamura alongside other members of the Mega Man 2 team worked on the game Kokoro. Keep this game in mind, because I'll come back to it later. But for now, let's go and see what happened to the Mega Man series after Kitamura's departure. A year passed after the release of Mega Man 2. It was then that Capcom decided to greenlight Mega Man 3. However, it was also during this time that Kitamura left the company. So the first task at hand was to decide who was going to be the person that was going to take over the series after Kitamura. And the person that was chosen was Masayoshi Kurokawa, also known by his alias Patarito. He was a developer that started working at Capcom around the same time Kitamura joined the company. He worked as a game designer for the 1987 game Higemaru Majima, the Natsunoshima Daiboken, and the 1989 game Strider. While Kitamura was about to leave Capcom, he was notified that Kurokawa was the one assigned to take the mantle of the main planner for the next Mega Man game. Kurokawa approached Kitamura and asked if there were any ideas that he would like to see in the next game, and Kitamura actually gave him a couple of ideas, but the 3 that he has shared were the following ones. First, don't update the basic gameplay. Second, change the item 1 to 3 to a robot dog, as those items in Mega Man 2 were just placeholders, and the team actually intended to give them a real name. And third, introduce a new robot character that will be Mega Man's brother. 2 of the biggest additions in Mega Man 3, the Rush transformations and Proto Man, which is known as Breakman in this game, were actually ideas conceived by Kitamura. Despite the fact that Kitamura did not work in the development of this game, his influence can still be seen within the game, and the fact that these concepts were kept in the final game shows that Kurosawa was willing to follow Kitamura's vision for Mega Man 3. But from this point onward, the development of Mega Man 3 is shrouded in secrecy. The few information that has been made public about the development of Mega Man 3 has been filled with big statements made by one individual. That person has not indulged in many details of what really happened. Yet, for what we know, Mega Man 3 had a complicated development cycle. And to understand that, we need to take a look at the development team of Mega Man 3. The development of Mega Man 2 consisted of a small group, from which only 2 people came back to work on the sequel, one of them being Keiji Inafune, who reprised his role as designer. The other developers from Mega Man 2 were either working on other Capcom projects, or in the case of the composer for Mega Man 2, he left Capcom alongside Kitamura to work on Kokoron, which means that Mega Man 3 had a brand new team working on the game, with most of the members in the team being people that have never worked on a Mega Man game before. As the main planner for this project, Kurokawa had a huge task at hand, because not only he had to follow Kitamura's legacy, but also lead a team composed mostly of people that have little to no experience working in Mega Man games. But Kurokawa's involvement in the development of Mega Man 3 was complicated. How much Kurokawa contributed to the game is unknown. We know for certain that the ideas that Kitamura shared with Kurokawa were added to the final release, but aside from that, there is not much in the game that can be traced to Kurokawa's involvement. However, there has been one individual that has been vocal about the development environment behind Mega Man 3, and that person is Keiji Inafune. Inafune has expressed his frustration with Kurokawa's vision for the future of the Mega Man series, as, quote-unquote, he didn't understand Mega Man the way his predecessor did. The exact details of what these two creators were conflicted with are unknown. Inafune has been purposely vague about what happened behind the scenes, and as the development cycle continued, things kept getting worse for the team, as halfway through development, Kurokawa would leave the project, forcing Inafune to act as a last-minute replacement. Needless to say, this took a toll on Inafune. He recalled this moment as one of the most stressful ones in his career, as he had to work on so many aspects of the game at once, while also managing a team of developers that did not have as much experience working on the Mega Man series, and all of that hard work had to be done within strict deadlines. Inafune has also shared some anecdotes about the development, like the time he spent an entire week working on the design for one of the Robot Masters, Topman, when suddenly he lost all the data of the work he did for that character because someone tripped over the power cord, which devastated Inafune. But because the concept of Topman was so fresh in his mind, he went back to working on the design and managed to get back on track with it in only 3 days. That anecdote has made Topman an unforgivable memory for Inafune, a reminder of a really stressful time in his life. By the time the development cycle was coming to an end, Inafune realized that the team did not have enough time. There were a lot of rough edges, but Capcom forced the team to release the game even though there was still a lot that had to be done. This frustrated Inafune because he knew the team was capable of making a better game, but they had no choice. And on September 28, 1990, Mega Man 3 was released for the Nintendo Famicom. Mega Man 3 is a victim of its circumstances. This game had the laborious task of being a follow-up to Mega Man 2. Without Kitamura, the vision on how to continue the series was unclear, and that led to a development environment that was disastrous. We might never know for certain what really happened in the background. All we know about the development of Mega Man 3 comes from Inafune himself, so giving an objective explanation of what went wrong for Mega Man 3 is impossible. As such, many theories have come up over the years. If you recall from earlier, Akira Kitamura left Capcom during the gap year between Mega Man 2 and 3. During that time, Kitamura alongside Tateichi worked on a brand new project, Kokoron. This was a 2D platformer that took place in a dream world. The aesthetic is colorful and fantastical with tons of surreal elements. But the gameplay is reminiscent of Mega Man, with a similar structure of choosing a stage from a list of multiple levels at the start of the game, where you face a boss at the end of each level and get a reward for beating them. However, the power-up system is interesting. The main gimmick of Kokoron is that you can create your own character, and it is a really ambitious system. Now, when you beat a level in Kokoron, you don't get a power-up. Instead, you get to create a new character. Think of something like a toy box where you create a toy from spare parts from other toys. This creates a gameplay loop that is similar enough to Mega Man, but adding enough mechanics to be its own thing. Now, How is this game related to Mega Man 3? Well, here is where we put our foil hats. As a theory says that Capcom rushed the development of Mega Man 3 to release the game to take away attention from Kokoron, even though Capcom was well aware of the development nightmare that was Mega Man 3, which means that Capcom feared that Kokoron could become so big that it will end up rivaling Mega Man. I would like to clarify that there is no strong base to this theory, and it is mostly speculative. Even the Wikipedia page for Kokoron says that this needs citation. So, if there is nothing to back this up, why even bring it up in the first place? Well, Mega Man 3 is an enigma. As the game was released 36 years ago, most of the people involved in this project have probably forgotten about it altogether. Maybe not Inafune, as he has been the one that has been the most vocal about his frustration with this project. The truth is that Mega Man 3 had a lot going against it, and it's not as easy to point out to only one culprit, when a lot of what is known about the development of the game comes from vague statements and theories. But despite everything, the game sold really well, being one of the few entries in the series to sell over 1 million copies. Compared to my previous Mega Man videos, I was more critical about this game. However, I do not hate Mega Man 3. Despite all its issues, it is still a fun game, and if the original Mega Man 3 is too incomplete or bugging for your liking, there is always the Wily Wars, which fixes many issues with the original release, and is definitely my preferred version of the game. Mega Man 3 leaves us a really important lesson that is applicable in every discipline. Not everything will go according to your plans. There are many things that will go wrong, but you have to make the best of it, and you might feel that you could have done better, and that regret will always be there. But as long as you feel that regret, you will always aspire to do better next time, and if you keep trying, your craft will be better. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, leave a like, write down a comment about your favorite part of the video or your favorite Mega Man game or anything that you would like to share. I'm looking forward to reading your comments. And if you'd like to see more content like this, consider subscribing. That supports the channel and also motivates me to keep making more content. Thanks for making it this far, and until next time.